the difficulty with how much light we have in the room. Sorry about that. Okay. So back to the other technology. Okay. So what would this global democracy look like? I'd like to start off with an illustration and a couple of examples. Okay? So as you know, given that you live down here, California and Arizona share a border, several hundred miles, of the Colorado River, which forms the border. And occasionally, and again, I'm sure you know this very much better than we hear about it up north, there are water rights disputes between the two states. Now, I'm wondering if you ever heard of a little-known event that happened not too long ago. Oops. How did that happen? Okay, there we go. Our governor, some time ago, was massing troops at the border and actually was planning to do an incursion into Arizona and take over the Colorado River. And of course, given that he's the governor, I mean, you know, he can do those kinds of things. So I want to check, how many of you have heard this, caught it when it was about to happen? Anybody? Okay. Well, you know why? Because it never happened. Okay? Why wouldn't it have happened? Something like this. Why would this not have happened? Yes. We have something called the federal government. So that if there's a dispute between two groups, what they could do is they can bring it to a higher authority, the federal courts, right? And if Schwarzenegger or the Arizona governor, but I think it would more likely be Schwarzenegger, had the, the audacity, whatever, to do this, what would happen to them? They would end up in jail. All right, good. Yeah, should have happened. So rather than having to come in and bomb California, or embargo Arizona, or starve all the children, you just arrest them. When someone's breaking the law, you come from a higher level and you arrest them. Okay. So kind of starting with that, what if when you went to vote, you not only voted for your representatives at the local, state, and federal level, but you also voted for your representatives to the World Parliament, right? All at the same time. And what if that World Parliament had a constitution, just like most countries have, had a global Bill of Rights that might be very much akin to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the UN has, but in addition to that, it had teeth. It was enforceable. What if that global structure was set up as a federal structure with the principle of subsidiarity, which means that local problems get handled at the local level, national problems at the national level, and global problems like war between two countries that gets handled at the global level? What if there was universal accountability, as in no one's above the law? And yeah, here are a few guesses. Yeah, and individual accountability in that if you have a problem with, pick your favorite villain, whether it's Assad now or Saddam Hussein or whatever, you don't have to bomb the country. You don't have to arm the rebels. You don't have to you arrest them. You just take the villain, take the lawbreaker, and arrest them. And what if we had the global structures to do all this? Okay. Hello? Okay. So where did this idea come from? And actually, as folks were coming into the room, I heard so many people who were involved with a lot of these ideas as they were forming, so you probably know this better than me. But anyhow, so where did this come from? So throughout history, there were a number of philosophers, jurists, people in various fields that began to kind of set down the foundation for this kind of thinking. Grotius, a Dutch jurist, I guess he was just too if he was a jurist, a Dutch jurist set out what is considered now the foundation of international law. Immanuel Kant, famous German philosopher, wrote a book called Perpetual Peace, in which he began talking about the kind of structures that might go into this global governance structure. But even though these ideas were sprinkled throughout history, things really didn't start cooking until the foundation of this country, until we were formed. Another US-centric comment. And basically, I know when I was in school, hello? Okay. we learned, and I'm sure you learned this too, that after we broke off from Great Britain, there was a period of a few years when we were under the Articles of Confederation. Okay? Now, they didn't tell us much about that, at least not where I went to school, which was a good school in New York. They just said, well, that went on for a couple of years, it didn't work very well, so we scrapped it and did something else. Okay? But when you really look at it, and it was enlightening to me when I looked at it, there were a number of problems in many different arenas during that few-year period. And on the economic side, we had 7 states that had their own currencies. They couldn't even do commerce with each other. It was a struggle. We had different states boycotting things from other states. For example, Boston boycotted grain from Rhode Island. New York put heavy taxes on butter from New Jersey and wood from Connecticut. This was happening all around. And the states were imposing taxes on the shipments across states. So economically, things were not taking off for the new country. It was more like 13 separate countries than being pulled together. Okay? Then there were all kinds of armed conflicts. You could call them war. Pennsylvania massacred 2,000 settlers that moved into Pennsylvania from Connecticut. Maryland and Delaware fought what they called an oyster war over fishing rights in the Potomac River. New York and New Jersey exchanged cannon fire. I couldn't find why. Maybe they don't need a reason. But they were shooting at each other. And New York was massing troops on the Vermont border as if to go in and invade there. So that was on the military side. Okay. On the domestic security side, 9 of the states had their own navies. They were so small, since they were just single states, that whenever they would go out to sea, the pirates would defeat them. So they couldn't do anything in terms of shipping. The state militias were all essentially separate armies, and they had difficulty coordinating if we had another attack or invasion or what have you. So basically, the place was a mess. You know, remarkably similar to the world today. Okay? So what happened, again, as you know, this part I did learn in school, is a couple of wise folks got together and wrote a series of essays called the Federalist Papers, where they started kind of, talking about and brainstorming and dreaming about this way to have the states be separate and still have some unifying entity over it. And then there was another fellow also, hello? Okay. You doing? Okay, another fellow, particularly wise man, who knew about the Iroquois nations. And at least the talk was they had 1,000 years of peace from doing this, bringing the nations together and having some counsel over it. So they had a lot of debates, a lot of arguments in the Congress there, and then put it in a pot and stirred all those ideas, and poof, what we got is a federal government. So so here we are, we the people, voting at both the state level, having the states be an entity, but giving up some sovereignty to the federal level so that we can have this peace, security, economic prosperity, et cetera, and the rest is history with what happened in the country. Okay, now moving it into these ideas into our movement, fast forward for about 200 years, and you get to the history of the World Federalist Movement. So this is where I got to shoot here and I got to look there. I feel like an orchestra conductor. So the movement, again, as you know, started around World War II. Technically right before World War II. There were some far-sighted people who wanted to try to avoid the war. But it really didn't begin gaining momentum until after World War II. And at that time, obviously, the main idea was to not have a World War III, to avoid another major war. Now, during that time, as in any movement, there are a number of leaders. If you look at the women's movement, the civil rights movement, various movements, they all have a number of leaders. And and some of you may have heard of, was Gary down here, by the way, speaking at any point? Gary Davis? He did come. Okay, so maybe a number of you have met him. So he is one of the fellows that was involved in the early days, and it's very hard, particularly for the young people these days, to get a sense of what the feel was after World War II that started these kinds of movements. But his work, Gary's, has been very well documented by a particular producer, Arthur Kanagas, and I want to show you a little piece of what he did, both to talk about him specifically, but also to give you a sense of what was happening back then, what the ferment was right after World War II for these ideas. Okay, so we're gonna try the sound again because we're doing so we'll see. Hopefully